Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh's death caused widespread controversy and inconclusivity about who killed her. Many believe it came from an IDF sniper. The IDF says it is impossible to determine who killed her without conducting forensic tests on that fatal bullet. Whilst the US wanted to investigate the bullet that killed her, the Palestinians have refused to give them the one in question, until now, whereupon they have agreed for a cooperative investigation with Israel and Washington. As we wait for the answers, this moment could be a historical act of cooperation between the two sides, especially under a new Israeli leader who said he wants to reach out to his Palestinian neighbours. But where do we go from here? Is this just a one-off end to the he said, she said debate, or could we finally see more cooperation between the two sides? Will Shireen Abu Akleh's death be a catalyst for peace, or just another life lost in this long conflict? Is this a crisis or an opportunity for peace for Israel?
So let's get to it. A crisis or rather an opportunity, dear gentlemen. You know the rules. You get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance, and we pick up the debate right after. So, Mr. Bisharat, please take the lead.
I am very sorry, but there is nothing new under the sun. As long as Israelis continues its policy against the Palestinian people, there is hundreds of Palestinians were killed in the past 2 months. This means the mistrust between the two sides will continue, and the very bad joke that they don't know who killed Shireen Abu Akleh. I think it will be more confuse all the situation.
Yes, and trust is indeed a key factor here. We'll get to that in a second. Mr. Ostrovsky, your take?
Look, I think one thing is certain, that as day follows night, the Palestinian leadership will use the opportunity to turn any issue into a crisis. Shireen Abu Akleh's death, while horrible and tragic, has been made even more tragic by the Palestinians' politicization of her death. Israel called from the very beginning for a joint investigation. The Palestinians refused. We have to ask, what are they hiding? 2 months later, we have to ask if any investigation will ultimately be compromised as a result of the Palestinians' refusal to cooperate.
Yes, all solid questions that we will try to answer in a minute. Last but not least, Mr. Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I think that in Israel, people don't understand what is the significance of this event. Shireen Abu Akleh was a familiar face in each house in the Arab world. We are talking about millions of Arabs that used to watch her. She is a symbol. And this is why the Arab world and the Palestinians demand accountability. And the big question is whether, if it's going to be Israeli soldiers' bullet, then the question will be what next? An investigation, a criminal investigation?
You know what? That's a great question, and let's kickstart the debate. And from this point onwards, gentlemen, please feel free to interact. Let's begin with the question Yariv was raising. If any result of the potential investigation will be conclusive, what is next, Mr. Bisharat?
Look, all these investigations, like Mohammed al-Durra before 22 years, the Israeli make a lie, and after that they themselves they believe it. I think it's very too silly. Who the troops of Israel is there? The Israel shells the Palestinian homes and all in Geneva, for example. And after that, it says that he is not guilty. I think this is very bad. 300 people were killed during the past 2 months. Nobody was. The Israel claimed that they didn't kill by it. Only Shireen Abu Akleh. This means when there is a very famous man, very famous woman, a very famous character, and all the world are asking, it makes itself as, I think it's a lie, and it's not
Mr.
nice.
Bisharat, I agree with you, but I think we are better, even if she's a symbol, and because of that she's getting a different attitude. I think it's better than nothing. And the question, what will happen next, we need to remember what happened with Turkey and Israel. Eventually, Israel took responsibility and even pay money for the Turkish as compensations.
Yeah, you're
so
referring
I
to
don't
the
see a criminal investigation if it's going to be an army bullet that killed Shireen Abu Akleh, but I do see some action that the Israeli government eventually will have to do in order to take responsibility.
Israel behaved like a child that he want to kill and want to invade and want to make.
No, but Mr. Bisharat, what was it?
And after that, she wants that all the world love it. All the world can't love a country that invaded another country, that killed the people there. But this is a problem with the Israel society. They want to be nice. All the world love it, but the situation is very bad.
But Mr. Bisharat, what is the trigger, in your opinion, to this change of heart on behalf of Ramallah to provide the bullet, which until this point in time it refused to?
I think this is the pressure of the United States. Biden will come during 10 days or something like this, and they cannot stand against his willing. So they want to cooperate with him. Second thing, Israel is the ruler here. And if they claim it, and it must pay not only financial support for the Palestinian for this killing, but also to pay to the public opinion that it's a crime in the occupied areas.
Well,
if I can please jump in here.
Yes, please.
Possibly the only thing I will agree with Mr. Bisharat in this segment is the fact that the trigger for this for the Palestinians releasing the bullet now is the upcoming visit of President Biden and their very transparent attempt to be in the administration's good graces. But Mr. Bisharat used the example in response to the previous question also about Mohammed al-Dura, and if I'm correct, a number of years later, it was proved conclusively that the bullet actually killed Mohammed al-Dura was actually a Palestinian bullet, not an Israeli. So
this is a lie. I think you are repeating a lie.
But since Mohammed al-Dura, we saw so many incidents.
We want to hear all of you, but it's very difficult when you all speak together. So Arsen Ostrovsky, please finish your argument, and we will move on from there. Yeah.
I have the same courtesy to finish my argument. At the end of the day, we want the truth as well. We want to determine who killed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, but the fact of the matter is the Palestinians have refused to cooperate, and 2 months later we really have to ask the questions, is the bullet compromised? Why did they refuse to cooperate?
I wish to answer that.
I hope that perhaps we can find some conclusions now, and I hope there can be some kind of ending to this.
Oppenheimer, please.
Yeah, yes. The Palestinian didn't want to give the bullet because they didn't trust the Israelis, and they thought that if they will do so, Israel is very smart, and there is a way to change things and not to make a real clear, open investigation. And until the U.S. didn't give enough trust and enough insurance to the Palestinians that this investigation is going to be a real one, I think that the Palestinians took the time, and we saw until now some very important investigation, including American news CNN, that actually check all what you can check in order to show who killed Shireen Abu Akleh, and the result was very, very clear.
Okay.
It was the IDF.
I'm sorry, but the results were not very clear, because after every single one of these investigations by CNN, AP, and the others, there were two things missing from each and every one of them. One was the fact that to each of these investigations, there was no witness present at the time of the shooting, and number two, there was no forensic examination conducted of the bullet. So unless these gentlemen are some kind of forensic experts who were present at the scene or investigated the bullets, I'm sorry, but you cannot make such conclusive statements as you have.
It's not a conclusion, because we will wait for the final investigation, but it's another reason why the Palestinians waited.
But is there a definitive conclusion, a definitive result that will make both sides, quote unquote, satisfied here, or is it yet another round of one winner, one loser, similarly to the deadlock in all contacts between Israel and the Palestinians, a zero-sum game?
Unfortunately, I don't see this issue end, even if the investigation will show that it's a Palestinian bullet that killed it, so the Arab world will not accept this result. And if it's going to show that it's an Israeli bullet, so the Arab world will demand Israel to take action and to show accountability. And I don't see the Israeli government or the Israeli army start a criminal investigation against the soldiers. Therefore, I think that we are not even close to one up and to close this issue. It's going to be one of the things that make the hatred more in the Arab world against Israel, because she was such a symbol for them.
Mr. Bisharat, I see you want to chime in as well.
I think the Arabs, including the Arab inhabitants in Israel and the democratic Jewish, they don't trust in Israel investigations. Let us remember that we, the Arabs, our 13 young were killed in 2000. And our committee decided that there was not reason to kill them. And after that, nobody was introduced to the court. 13. So we think that all this country, all this administration in Israel is come to cover all the crimes and to say nobody are charges. So I think it's. I spoke about 200 Palestinians in Gaza, not in the were killed. Yeah. In the before 3 years in the demonstrations, and nobody was charges in Israel, and nobody was was investigations. So it's silly, very silly. All these the justice of Israel is very silly. The Arabs are not believe them. The Israeli inhabitants, Arabs not believe them, and the honest people in Israel don't believe this.
Yes, Arsen. Before we take a break, your final thoughts.
Yeah. Two very quick thoughts. One, over 20 Israelis have been murdered in Palestinian terror attacks this year. I'd love to know from Mr. Bashar if he can advise us how many investigations Palestinian leadership has commenced. I can tell you the answer is 0. One other thing, you'd like to know the response to the Arab world, just look at the Abraham Accords. Look at the Arab and the Gulf world coming and embracing Israel, increasing cooperation
this is propaganda. We are not in a similar situation, the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the Palestinian Authority is working against terror. Ask not us, ask the Prime Minister, the head of the Shabak.
Well, gentlemen, as always, it is getting interesting. Before we have to take a break, you are staying with us. We're heading out for a short break, but we continue the debate right after, so don't go anywhere. As you can see, it's getting even more interesting. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Oda Bisharat, Yariv Oppenheimer, and Arsen Ostrovsky. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we dive back into the conversation, let's take a listen to some of the remarks by Israel's new interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid in his first address to the nation last night.
We believe that so long as Israel's security needs are met, Israel is a country that seeks peace. Israel stretches out its hands to all the peoples of the Middle East, including the Palestinians, and say, the time has come for you to recognize that we'll never move from here. Let's learn to live together.
So, gentlemen, Mahmoud Abbas constantly losing power, Lapid now taking the lead, and Biden on his way here. Could we possibly see any change in tune before we dive back into the debate? 30 seconds each, and we continue from there. Arsen Ostrovsky.
Look, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for President Biden to come here and specifically to reaffirm the U.S. role as Israel's foremost ally and unbreakable bond between our countries. I hope to hear the President speak loudly and unequivocally, reaffirming Jerusalem's status as Israel's undivided capital, certainly on Iran and the Palestinian incitement, important issues. I hope that we do not see the U.S. Going back on some failed policies of the past in which they turn their backs on the Palestinian incitement and intransigence and finally continue to hold them accountable.
Yariv Oppenheimer, your take?
We saw yesterday that for the first time for many years, the Prime Minister of Israel is talking about peace and talking about Palestinians. This is something that we need to take very seriously. We know that the Biden administration support the idea of the two-state solution, and we know that there are going to be elections in Israel soon. Therefore, I think that we will hear a different music. We will see more gestures that Israel will do to the Palestinian to strengthen the Palestinian Authority, but only after the election, if Lapid will remain a prime minister, we will be able to see a real change in policy and maybe even resume of negotiation.
Well, if and when, and until then, Ode Bisharat, any possible change is going to come?
I think there will be some changes, but it will be in the form, but not in the important matters. Maybe they will. The Americans will. We can see more financial support of the Palestinian Authority, something like that, but not more. I think the American are coming here for another purpose. The purpose is to establish a military alliance in the Middle East. The Palestinian issue now, they are not in their mind. We could saw recently.
Well, Yuri Oppenheimer, I want to start with the Israeli side. Indeed, words that we haven't heard from an Israeli premier in a while, but even Lapid himself cannot claim to have legitimacy to pursue any major policy moves during election season while as interim prime minister. So we can't really expect anything to happen now.
We cannot expect a peace treaty or even negotiation that will lead to a peace treaty, but we can see and we can expect a change of the policy. This government, by the way, changed the policy. This government resumed talking, speaking, cooperating with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and this government also opened the Gaza border for workers to work inside Israel, and this is why the Gaza border is much more quiet than previous governments. So we do see a change in the policy toward the Palestinians. It's not just the music, it's also the substance. The Palestinians need Israel, and they need Israel for construction, for housing units, even for cellular reception, and Israel is ready to go forward with these gestures that are going to be very important for the ordinary Palestinian, because it's not just about Israel, it's also what's going on in Palestine. And if Israel will continue the policy of Netanyahu to discard and not to deal with the Palestinian Authority seriously, Hamas is taking power. And if the Palestinian Authority is being respected by Israel and can show that it gives to the Palestinian people some benefits, then Hamas is losing power. Therefore, it's very important what Lapid will do and what this government will do, not only for the Israeli public, but also to the Palestinian discourse and society.
And Mr. Bisharat, well, Biden will have to walk between the drops on the Israeli side due to the political situation. When it comes to Ramallah, the objective here is very clear: to rebuild trust, if you will, or to rebuild relations. What Biden could, would, should do?
I think let us first of all speak about the Israel government. Israel government now want to show itself that it's more extreme to right, more extreme against Palestinians, more extreme against Arabs. Let us remember that this it's called government, a change government, something like this, that she built more than in the period of Netanyahu in the settlements. It also make the Palestinian lives so difficult under the attacks of the settlers in the West Bank. So I don't have that they have something good for the Palestinians, especially now in the evening of the election.
But Mr. Bushat, if I may ask you, don't you see a change between? Just a question. Don't you see a change between Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid? You think they are all the same?
No, I think that this government and now Yair Lapid, like the Labour Party, all the time want to show to the Israeli citizens that they are more nationalist, more against Arabs, more against. Look at the history of the Labour Party. It's like this: the right is speaking, and the
Labour Party did the Oslo Labour Party did the Oslo deal, you know.
Just a minute. Also Begin withdrew from the Egyptian territories. No, So we have a very bad government. This government want to show their citizens that they are more extreme than Netanyahu, that they are continue building. I suggest you to read the article with Shimrit Meir about what they did. This government.
Yeah, but Shimrit Meir is out, and Naftali Bennett is out, and now we have Yair Lapid, and he is speaking in a different language. And listen, and look what Lapid is talking with the Americans. He's talking about how to promote Palestinian interest in the West Bank. This is something new.
If you want to lie to yourself, you are free. Lie and say it's very good for us, and this is a country, and we have a very nice man. He called his name, but you know. Yair Lapid now entered the house in Jerusalem that was belonged for Palestinian that he expelled.
So there is no end to this debate. Okay, Mr.
What is the face of this government?
Mr. Ostrovsky, yes.
There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm afraid we need much more time if I need to respond to every issue.
So let's move forward.
I would just say this. You started off with
the typical of this government.
Mr. Bishar, I'll let you speak, so please do me the same courtesy. You started by asking about the nature of Israel's transitional government. I would perhaps say the other question we should be asking is, what about the Palestinian government? Mahmoud Abbas is in the 18th year of his 4-year term, in his 18th year. When will we see Palestinian elections? What kind of support does Mahmoud Abbas have to actually implement anything? The fact of the matter is, we've had transitional governments in Israel, we've had full governments, we've had governments from the left and the right, and everything in between, including the center. But the one constant throughout the last 2+ decades has been Palestinian rejection and intransigence.
Well, we don't have time to answer all those questions. Please, in one line for each, when will we see the Abraham Accords impacting Jerusalem-Ramallah relations, if at all? Yariv.
Unfortunately, I think that the Arab world and the Gulf state can use the Abraham Accord in order to pressure the government to go through to the Palestinians. We don't see it yet, but there is more to come, and the news about Saudi Arabia is going to make, I think, a real change in the area, in the region.